is Kirby Lockard, and you're watching one of the Design Drawing Videotapes. This is a series of 10 videos designed to help students of architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design learn to draw freehand perspective sketches. This particular tape is the second tape in the set on perspective structure and deals with laying out exterior perspectives. It builds on the previous introduction to perspective, which I hope you will recall and we'll review slightly. And this tape is broken up into 3 segments. There's a sort of a review preview segment, and then we will draw 2 perspectives. So that each one of those segments is about 20 minutes. I'd like you to remember that the biggest value of these tapes, in fact, in some ways the only value, is you're drawing along with me. It doesn't do any good to just sit and watch them as if you were watching television. In order to draw with me, you're going to need a small set of equipment, which is here in this blue glass. You're going to need 2 marking pens, one that will draw a fine black line and one that will draw a heavier black line. You're going to need 3 colored markers, a red, a blue, and a green, and you're going to need 5 Prismacolor pencils, a red, a blue, and a green Prismacolor pencil, and a white Prismacolor and a black Prismacolor. So with the other thing you're going to need is a big stack of yellow tracing paper, buff tracing paper, like this. You'll need a great supply of that, and it's probably good to tear it into pieces ahead of time so that we don't waste a lot of time tearing off the sheets. So with those warnings and that set of equipment, we're ready to begin. And I'd like to begin by asking you to recall the previous videotape where we learned to extend spatial units. And if you'll pick up your fine-tipped marker and begin drawing with me by drawing a horizontal line, please draw it along the bottom of your paper. A horizontal line like that, and remember that we call this the eye level line. To remind us of that, let's draw a human figure over here on the left side, like that, and then let's draw 2 vertical lines, one down the left-hand side of your paper, and the other down the right-hand side of your paper. Okay, now we need to name the parts of this perspective framework, because you will remember this is one arrangement of vanishing lines and vanishing points, which constitutes one of the frameworks on which we can draw perspectives. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the most useful of those frameworks. It's a 3-line, 2-point perspective framework made up out of 2 vertical vanishing lines, 1 horizontal vanishing line, and 2 vanishing points. Now we're going to be drawing our perspective over on this side, so let's start by drawing a vertical line equidistant above and below the eye level vanishing line. So it looks something like that. And since we're going to draw the perspective over here, and we know that, we can now name the parts of the framework. We're going to call this point the near vanishing point. And I think it helps, the names help remember and help us learn anything. The names of the pieces and some idea of how the pieces go together. We're going to call this line the near vertical vanishing line. We're going to call this line the far vertical vanishing line, and we're going to call this point the far vanishing point. The one remaining name is this line, and we're going to call it the eye level vanishing line. Okay, now with those names, we're ready to begin drawing a perspective using this perspective framework. The first step will be to connect the top and bottom of this line to the far vanishing point. Now here you're going to get a chance to draw one of those long, kind of scary freehand lines without the T-square and without the triangle. Connect this point and that same vanishing point on the top. And then draw the shorter ones that go on over to the near vanishing point. They should be easier to draw. And now we need to pick up our color pencils and color code this framework and the planes we've drawn. Please pick up your red marker and color the eye level line, the horizontal eye level vanishing line that we drew first, red. Now that will be a color code for horizontal lines and horizontal planes. Now please color the right hand or near vanishing line green with your green marker, and take your green Prismacolor pencil and color in this vertical plane green. Now we're doing that to remind ourselves that that plane, that vertical plane, vanishes into this green vanishing line at visual infinity. So there's a relationship between that plane and that line that we mustn't forget. Please take your blue Prismacolor pencil and color in the plane going across in front of us blue. And make sure you can perceive the blue plane and the green plane as being two vertical planes that intersect at this corner. This corner also has a name. We're going to call it the wide side limit. That means that that's the far wide corner of the perspective, and we won't be drawing very much or any perspective beyond that point. Okay, now with that framework set up and those two planes intersecting at this corner, we're ready to begin measuring off space along the blue plane. And we do that first by estimating what looks to us like a square standing in the blue plane, like that. Once you're willing to estimate a square like that, then we need to draw the diagonals of that square. And I'd like to ask you to keep the color code going by drawing those diagonals with a blue marker to remind you that they lie in the blue plane. Once you're willing to draw those diagonals, we need to drop a vertical through their intersection, like that, and then we're ready to find a vanishing point for one of those diagonals. We do that by extending this diagonal until it intersects with the far vertical vanishing line. Now, we're using the second principle of perspective, and that is that sets the parallel lines converge to single points on the vanishing line for the plane in which they lie, because this blue plane vanishes into this blue vanishing line. Okay, now having found that, we can come back with diagonals from that point to this point, and we will mark off where we go through the top line the next square to the left of the initial square. We can do it again, and we can just keep doing it as long as our eyesight and our pencil sharpness holds out. We can keep marking off increments, 10-foot increments, marching off to this far vanishing line. Okay, that's one way you can extend that initial spatial unit. There are times when, for whatever reason, you can't reach this point. It's so far away, or it's covered up with another piece of paper or a reference book that you have lying on your drawing board, and you just don't want to go to the bother of reaching that. And sometimes it's physically so far away you couldn't possibly reach it. But whenever either of those circumstances occur, there's an alternate way of measuring off squares. So if you move your paper up to the middle like that, because we no longer need to reach that vanishing point, and lay down a fresh piece of rough tracing paper over the original drawing, let's retrace just a few things. Let's retrace the eye level line. Let's retrace the far vertical vanishing line. That's this blue vanishing line. And let's retrace the green vanishing line, the near vanishing line. So we have our three-line, two-point perspective structure again. Now, let's take the black marker and draw first that corner, the wide side limit, and then draw the top and bottom lines of the blue plane. Let's make that first depth guess. Say that that looks to us like a 10-foot square. We'll draw the diagonals of that square, like that. And this time, without having to reach or locate a distant vanishing point, we simply drop a vertical down through the intersection of those diagonals. And now we're going to extend squares by using a method called the diagonal through the bisectors. This is a bisector of the first square, and so is the red eye level line. So if we draw a diagonal that connects those 2 points and keep it going until it intersects the top line. We can drop a vertical and we will have marked off a 5-foot increment. We can do it again and get 10 feet. We can do it again, and we're now at 15 feet, and we can just keep doing that. Unlike the first way, where we found a vanishing point for diagonals of the 10-foot square, this way only marks off 5 feet at a time. But geometrically, it's exactly the same method as the first, and the result will be the same. It's just that you don't have to reach that distant vanishing point if you don't want to. Okay, now let's assume that the building we're going to draw is 10, 20, 30 feet wide. We're going to call this plane, the blue plane that comes across in front of us, the width plane, because it's the plane on which we measure the width of any building we're going to draw. Once we get to the end of the building, we have reached another one of those parts of the framework that we need to name. This point we're going to call the hinge. And the reason we call it the hinge is that it's at this point that we're going to hinge on another plane, a different plane that's going to vanish into the green vanishing point. And to do that, we're going to need to lay down another piece of tracing paper. So please take another piece of yellow buff paper, lay it down like that, and redraw the hinge. That's the other end of the building. Okay, that's the distant end of the building. Let's redraw the eye level line. And redraw the 2 vertical vanishing lines, just so we recall the perspective framework we're working with, and the green one. Okay, now we're going to draw another plane. Starting at the top and bottom of the hinge, we're going to draw green lines to the near vanishing point, like that. And extend them on out in front of the blue plane like that. Okay, now you need to perceive that as a different plane from the first plane, and it will help if you take your green Prismacolor pencil and just color it in with vertical lines so that you understand it's a vertical plane that's 10 feet high, that's going from the hinge, that is to say the distant corner of the building, back to the near vanishing point. Okay, now the way we measure off increments of space on that plane is just like we do on the blue plane. First thing we do is we guess what looks to us like a 10-foot square standing in that plane. Maybe I guessed that a little too narrow. Maybe it's more like that. We draw the diagonals of that first 10-foot square, and we drop a vertical down through their intersection like that. Then we use the diagonals through the bisector method to get 5 feet, 10 feet. And please keep drawing with me. Don't just give up and start watching television. If you're not drawing with me, you're probably not learning much from this videotape. Let's get 15 feet. So that the building we're drawing, let's assume, is 30 feet wide and 15 feet high. And this plane that we're using now, the green plane, we call the depth plane. And please write that on your drawing, and it'll help you remember that this is a different kind of plane than the blue width plane. And notice that this was our first 10-foot guess. Okay? And then notice that we marked off 3 5-foot increments so that we now have a building that is potentially 15 feet deep. Okay, now we need to pull that depth across the perspective like this from the far vanishing point. So we go over here, and with the blue marker we pull a line across like that. We now redraw the front bottom of the blue plane. We can redraw the end of the building, and then please take your red Prismacolor pencil and color that footprint red, because that's the footprint of the building on the Earth's surface. And you need to be able to see that as a red horizontal plane that's 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep. And now we're ready to pull up the corners of the building and make a volume out of it. So you can take your black marker, redraw that corner line, which was the original wide side limit. Pull this corner up like that. Redraw these two corners, which you already have back there. Take your blue marker and draw the front eave of the building, which would be the top of the original blue plane, and then draw the back eave, the one that's hidden, like that. Take your green marker and draw this eave of the building, and I hope you can see that as a volume. That's 10 feet high, 15 feet wide, and 15 feet deep and 30 feet wide. It may help if you take your red Prismacolor pencil and just color in the ceiling plane, like that. We're going to start a new segment now, and we're going to draw a full perspective of a very simple little building. So if you look in the packet that came with this videotape, you should find a drawing of a little building that looks something like this. We're not going to take a lot of time explaining the building. You should take the time to be comfortable with the dimensions so that you know what the dimensions are and you know the configuration of the building, just as familiar as if you had been the designer of the building. Okay, so if you are familiar with the building, or if you'll stop the tape and get familiar with it, we're ready to draw a perspective of this little building. The two things we're doing by way of simplification, which I should explain, is that we're using just multiples and subdivisions of the 5-foot dimension. We're not using any oddball dimensions, just for the sake of economy in videotape time. We're not fooling around with 21 inches or 14 and a half inches. We're just using even multiples and subdivisions of 5 feet. We're also drawing just orthogonal, that is to say rectangular buildings and spaces. We're not dealing with curves. We're not dealing with angles except just a few roof angles. So in that sense, we're simplifying the procedure so that we can get the maximum repetition out of it. So we can get you to go through the procedure 2 or 3 times, because that's what it takes to learn to draw perspective. It's not the complexity of what you're drawing. Now, the way we're going to draw this perspective is we're going to use those 2 planes that we did in the little preview we just finished. We're going to use a green width plane, which we'll put on the front facade of the building. We'll measure down the width plane until we come to the point we call the hinge. Then we'll hinge on the blue depth plane. It will estimate a 10-foot square and extend that to get the depth of the building. So we're going to use those same 2 planes we did in the introduction. Now, if you'll put this perspective aside where you can see it and refer to it, just put it off to the side and put down a brand new piece of yellow tracing paper, we're ready to begin. And we begin by drawing an eye-level vanishing line, a horizontal line right straight across the middle of your paper. We then need to draw a vertical vanishing line down the left side and a vertical vanishing line down the right side. And we need to set a wide side limit. This time we're going to put it on the left, so we don't have any problems with left and right-handedness. Let's draw a vertical line right there, equidistant above and below the eye level line. Okay? We call that the wide side limit. Now we're going to connect lines from the near vanishing point to the top and bottom of that wide side limit, and then we're going to take lines to the far vanishing point from the top and bottom of the wide side limit. If your lines don't come out right the first time, if you miss that point, just draw another line, because we're going to overlay this and we'll have plenty of opportunity to correct it. Now remember, you need to see this as a vertical plane. And this is the plane we call the width plane. And it's on this plane that we're going to measure the width of the building. We begin by guessing what looks to us like a 10-foot square, and I'd say it's about there. Once we're willing to make that guess, we can draw the diagonals of that square. We can drop a vertical line through the intersection of those diagonals, and we can mark off 5 more feet and another 5 feet until we have reached a 20-foot width, which, if you refer to the little aerial perspective, is as wide as the building is. It's only 20 feet wide. So this point, then, is the hinge. Now, perhaps we'd better just repeat these names so that you don't forget them. Remember that this is the width plane. And remember that this we call the wide side limit. Okay, now, when we reach the hinge, we need to put down another piece of tracing paper. We need to separate these operations still, I think, to make you understand once more that these are two completely separate operations. We're now going to draw a plane that is hinged to the first blue plane at 90 degrees. This is a green plane that vanishes into this near vanishing line. And we need to color it green and make sure you perceive it as a vertical plane 10 feet high that converges into the green vanishing line. We need to draw the eye level line on there probably. And we need to guess what looks like a 10-foot square standing in that green plane. I'd say it's about there. We need then to draw its diagonals, drop a vertical through their intersection, draw one diagonal like that, which is 5 feet back, another one like that, and that's going to be all we need because this little building is only 10 feet deep. Now what we need to do is pull that back line across like this from the far vanishing point and repeat the front line. Oop, I slipped out of register. If you do that, just take the time to reposition the drawing. Then we need to take the green pen and draw the end of the building. Take our red Prismacolor pencil and color in the footprint of the building. So there's the footprint of the little building on the ground. Okay, let's pull up the vertical corners of the building. Here's the original wide side limit, which you should still be able to see down through the overlays. There's the back corner. Here is the front. I'm just going to stick with black, I think. Here's the eave line of the building. Okay, now the next thing we want to do, let's draw the back eave line. So you can see the 30 by 10 or 20 by 10 foot volume of the building completed with the ceiling and everything. Now, let's draw the footprint of that central portion, which is only 10 feet square. You can notice if you look down through here that you can still probably see the center line. So that, and you can, or if not, we can very quickly redraw those diagonals. Extend this diagonal, and we can see that this is that central 10-foot portion of the building, which has a little gable roof on it. Let's draw the footprint of that 10 by 10 foot central portion of the building. To do that, we're going to pull out a line from this near vanishing point coming to there, and we're going to pull out another line coming to there. Okay, so that, and I'm going to make that a little darker red. That is the footprint on the ground of the central portion of the building. Let's pull vertically, pull its back corner up like that, and pull this other back corner up like that. And the next thing let's do is draw the gable end front on that. If you draw this other diagonal, the front 10-foot square, I think you can see that the little gable end is simply a mirror image of this triangle. So we can measure up, first we can extend the center line, or what will be the center line of the gable, up to somewhere near the ridge. Then we can just look at this and estimate 5 feet and another 5 feet. Draw the rake lines of the little gable. Go back to the near vanishing point and now draw the ridge of the gable, like that. Will we see the back point of the gable? Well, I don't know. We have to go back, draw the diagonals back there on that hidden facade, raise a center line from their intersection, and I think you can see, yes, we're going to just barely see it, and that's nice because that gives our roof a little more definition. Okay, now about this time, the drawing's getting pretty complicated. And one of the other advantages of overlays is that you can just reach for a new piece of tracing paper, lay it down over that mess of lines that we have just been making, and just draw the ones we need. Now let's draw the perspective framework, the 2 vertical vanishing lines. The eye level vanishing line. And now we'll just draw the building. We draw that corner, this corner, and this corner. We draw the top of the roof there, there, up over the gable like that, to the other end, the top, the ridge of the little gable roof. And now we can draw this portion of the building where it hits the ground. And we can also draw that corner, and we can draw that corner. But the next thing we need to do is get that roof thickness that comes down like a fascia on the 2 little porches. And if you look at if you refer to the aerial perspectives, if you look at this drawing, you can see that it is 2 foot 6 inches deep. So we have to measure that down so we can draw this little thickness of that roof. Well, there are a couple ways we can do that. Probably the easiest way is to just look at this square, which is a 5-foot square, and bisect it with diagonals like that. When we do that, we very quickly get 30 inches, because this then is 30 inches, and we can go over to the far vanishing point with a line and pull it across the perspective like this. And that will give us that roof thickness. When it comes to the corner, it turns and goes to the near vanishing point like that. And we're getting pretty well along toward finish. Let's get the columns. The little columns look like they're maybe 6 or 8 inches square, and we don't need to measure those. We can just sort of estimate them and draw them. We need to draw the back edge of the underside of that little porch roof. We need to draw this back corner. We need to draw the intersection of the little underside of the porch roof or the ceiling with the main gable part of the building, and it's going to be like that. And about this time, it's also fun to take out your black Prismacolor pencil and just shade the bottom of that little porch roof dark gray, because we know it'll never get any sunlight. It will be dark, and it'll begin to help make the drawing read. We can get the other column, the distant column, and its thickness, and we can get the underside of that other little porch roof coming from the near vanishing point like that. Okay, now we just have about one more thing to do on this perspective, and that's to put in the little semicircular arched opening in the gable, like that. And put in an indication of thickness on it. And we're just about finished. Let's do one more thing as far as light is concerned, and let's assume that the sun's coming from the right, but that a cloud is over the sun, so we're not getting direct shadows. We're just getting what you might call indirect light, so that we shade in all the left-facing surfaces, all the surfaces that face to the left. And we might even shade in this, well, we'd have to, this surface of the column and this surface of the thickness under the arch. Okay, now I'd like to ask you to do one more thing before we leave that and leave this little drawing, and that's spatially profile it. take out your fat black pen and heavy up those lines which hide space. Now, by that I mean those lines where you can't see two surfaces intersect. Best way to explain it perhaps is right here. The difference between this line and this line. When you look at this corner, nothing happens really at that corner. You can see the surfaces on both sides of the corner. But this corner is completely different. We can't see the hidden surface that's around the corner. We would only see it by walking in this direction and looking at it, so that as we walked in that direction, it would progressively reveal more of its background. So it's spatially completely different kind of edge than this corner. We call this a spatial edge, and it's those edges in a drawing that I would recommend you're heavying up. So that's what I'm doing now, and ask you to join me, is heavying up those edges which hide space. Okay, now we can do a couple more things real quickly. We can draw a mountain horizon behind the building. We can draw just a few lines on the ground which will make the building lie down, and those should get closer together as they go away from us. Now I think you can see that it doesn't take long to make a fairly decent perspective sketch. And when you're sure that you've understood how we got this, we're ready to go on to the next segment. And that segment is going to get us involved in drawing this perspective, which is quite a bit more complicated building. But you will find in your set of materials that came with this videotape a building that looks like this. Just as in drawing the previous perspective, you're going to need to be familiar with this building. So you need to take the time to understand the dimensions and the configuration just as if you had designed it. So I don't have to take time explaining it, or so you don't have to hesitate not knowing the dimensions of the building. And also, as in the other perspective, we're going to draw it by putting down our two planes. The green width plane right on the front facade of the building. Guess a square lying in that green plane, or standing in that green plane. Then measure down to the end of the building where we will get a hinge. We hinge on the blue depth plane. We make a guess at a square standing in the blue plane, and we extend that guess in both directions to get all the depths we need to draw the perspective. Now, one thing you'll notice, and it'll get a little more complicated in this building, that when we get a width, we have to pull it out into the perspective like this. We have to pull it from the near vanishing point or push it backwards to get it where we need it. The same thing occurs with the depths. When we get a depth, we will have to pull them across the floor like this in order to get them where we want to use them in drawing the perspective. So we must measure them on those two planes, but we need to pull them out as if they were drawers on runners from those planes to get them where we need that dimension. Okay, now since this is a slightly bigger building, we're going to need to do one other thing, and that's change the way we set up the perspective framework. If you'll draw real quickly with me a vertical vanishing line like that, a horizontal vanishing line like that, and another vertical vanishing line like that. And then if you will draw with me a little wide side limit, just this high, way over at this end of the perspective framework, and draw very long, far vanishing horizontal lines to the top and bottom of that wide side limit. Then we need to draw lines from the top and bottom to the near vanishing point, and we need to mark off a 10-foot square, and then extend by diagonals through the bisector, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-foot increments so that we get 30 feet wide. Now let's say that we want to make a drawing that looks like that, at that sort of dramatic angle to the near vanishing point. And the drawing, or the paper on which we are drawing, is only this big. And this is us. This is our head. This is our shoulder. This is our hand and arm and our pencil. And this is our other arm. There's no way in the world we can reach this far vanishing point. So we need a way of setting up the perspective framework so we can use the influence of this far vanishing point without having to reach it. Let me show you how we do that, because that's the system we use to draw this perspective. We do it like the little framework that is included with this, with the material that came with the videotapes. It looks something like this. There is a near vertical vanishing line, there's the eye level vanishing line, and there are these two tapered lines that converge very slightly to a far vanishing point. Now let's just retrace that so you understand what's happening, and so you could draw one for yourself. The only reason we give you this one is so the drawing will wind up a reasonable size and fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. The way you would set up the framework is you'd simply draw two tapered lines that were pretty close to the eye level line here and got a little further apart as they moved to the right. And you duplicate that with a mirror image line just below the eye level line like that. It started the same distance below as the other one was above and got slightly wider. Now that gives you the influence of a far vanishing point that we couldn't possibly reach. And it gives us a very dramatic, I think, view of any building that you'd want to draw. Okay, let's begin drawing this building by saying this is the wide side limit. Let's guess a square, draw its diagonals, and measure off, drop a vertical through the intersection of those diagonals, and mark off 4 more 5-foot increments. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how wide the building is, 30 feet. We've come to the point we call the hinge, and just to make sure we still separate these two operations, let's put down another piece of tracing paper, and let's draw near vanishing horizontal lines from the top and bottom of the hinge to the near vanishing point, like that. We better draw the near vertical vanishing line and the eye level vanishing line just to remind us what's happening. It's probably good to draw a figure over here to remind us that that is the eye level line. Okay, now we need to keep those two lines coming out in front of the width plane, and we need to guess what looks to us like a 10-foot square standing in this plane. Now remember, we didn't color that first plane, but maybe we ought to take the time to color this plane green and understand that it's a different plane. This is the depth plane. Once we've made that estimation, and we're willing to say that's 10 feet, then we can drop a vertical to the intersection of those diagonals and extend diagonals through the bisector to mark off 5-foot increments going back toward the near vanishing point. Now the building is only 10 feet deep, but there's a patio that goes another 15 feet back. So if we say this is the 10-foot building, and then 3 more of those 5-foot depth increments, and this will be the patio behind the building, and it's 15 feet. Now we're also going to need to come forward in the building. We've already come forward 10 feet, which will give us the depth of the porch. We need to get another 10 feet to take in the stairs that go down to sidewalk level. So we need a 5-foot increment there and another one. And now I think we have all the depths necessary to draw the perspective. What we need to do is make the footprint of the building on the ground. And to do that, we need to draw a tapered line which is respecting the far vanishing point, but is not dead parallel to this baseline. Let's first draw the front, the bottom of the front facade on the ground. You can see that in the previous underlay. Now let's go back 10 feet to this point and come across with a line which gets slightly wider as apart as it moves to the right. It's not really parallel to the eye level line, and it's not really parallel to this baseline. It's somewhere in between. It's a member of a set of fanned out lines that are respecting this far vanishing point that we can't reach. We can now draw from this, the bottom of the wide side limit, to the near vanishing point like that, and we will have marked off the footprint of this building on the ground. And we can take your red pencil and color that in red so that we see that as the footprint of the building. Let's pull up the corners of the building and draw the eaves of the building at 10 feet high and come to the near vanishing point like that so that we get that eave. And now let's pull out the little porch. If you refer back to your aerial perspective, you'll find that the porch pulls out, the right-hand side of it is 5 feet from the corner, and that it itself is 10 feet. And you can look down through your overlays, I think, and see that this is 10 feet. And now we're going to pull out the porch just like we'd pull out a drawer from a chest of drawers. We go back to the near vanishing point and we draw the runners on the floor. We draw the footprint of, or we draw the runners which we're going to pull out the porch on there on the floor. And we just pull them out like this from the near vanishing point. How far do we pull them out? Well, if you refer back to the little aerial perspective, you'll find out that the porch is 10 feet deep. So we have to go over here to our 10-foot depth guess and pull a line across the floor like that. Now, it's another one of those tapered, fanned out lines that's coming from a far vanishing point that we couldn't possibly reach. And where it intersects those two drawer runners, we have found the front corners of the porch. And we can draw those up vertically like that. We can bring the eave out. We can pull the eave out like the top of the drawer. And we can draw the top of the front of the drawer across like that. So there's the porch. Now let's get the gable end on the porch. We get that, and I'm going to change colors to blue. I hope that shows up a little better and maybe separates it from the black lines. Let's draw the diagonals in blue. Let's draw the center line of what will be the ridge in blue. Let's estimate if this is 5 feet and it's a 1-to-1 slope, then the peak of the gable end is going to be about there, 5 and another 5. So we can draw the gable end of the porch. Now, since that one looks so good, let's go over and do one on the end of the building. We draw the diagonals of the end of the building. We raise a vertical line, which would be the center line of the gable end. We look at this and say, if that's 5 feet, then another 5 feet is about there. And so I can draw the rake angles of the gable end like that. Now let's do the same thing down at this end of the building. You can see that that's the end of the building. We could draw the diagonals in the end of the building. We could raise the center line of the ridge. We could estimate 5 and another 5, and we could draw this front rake angle of the ridge, and then we could connect those two with the full length of the ridge, like that. Now, we can go from the ridge, or the peak of the gable end on the porch, to the near vanishing point, and we would be drawing the porch ridge. It's going to be something like that. And where it intersects the other ridge, we will have found the intersection of the two roofs. Okay, now about this time, the drawing is getting a little complicated, but let's get just a couple more things before we quit. Let's look at the aerial perspective and notice that the steps, the nose of the top step is 5 feet from the face of the little porch. We have 5 feet here on the depth plane, and we can pull that line across the floor like this, and it will give us the nose of the top step. You look at the retaining wall, the little corner of the retaining wall where the level drops down to the sidewalk, and you see that it's another 5 feet. So we go over here to this 5-foot line, and we pull it across like that, and so that the corner is going to be about there. We can do one more thing before we make an overlay. We can realize that it's 5 feet anywhere from eye level to the ground. So this is 5 feet where the retaining wall is. Half of that would be 30 inches. And if we just put down another one of those 30-inch measurements, we have gotten down to sidewalk level. So that is the level of the sidewalk, and we know we're going to have to draw a set of steps that goes from there to there. But let's put down a new piece of tracing paper first and sort of clean the whole perspective up a little. Now we just need to retrace the good lines, the lines that we're really going to use in the final drawing, and so we can draw those a little more accurately. But one layout thing we still need to solve is the thickness of that roof material that comes halfway down the building. And we can find that it comes down 30 inches. So this is 5 feet, that's 10 feet. So 30 inches is halfway between those two. So we can establish a line there and just carry it across the building as one of that, a member of that set of standout lines that's coming from the far vanishing point. Okay, we can draw the front gable end, the ridge that goes back, intersects with the other ridge. We can draw this gable end. Draw that eave and that rake. We're going to need to carry this thickness out onto the porch. So it comes out from the near vanishing point like that, and then it goes across the front of the porch like that. Okay, we need to draw that rake as a gable, that. Now let's draw the two big cylindrical columns at the corner of the porch. They're kind of big fat guys, about like that. And let's draw the sidewalk that comes out to the nose of the top step. Draw the base of the building where it hits the ground. Draw a line there where the porch hits the building. And we need to go from this corner back to the near vanishing point to get the far side of that porch roof and draw a line like that. Okay, now we only have about 2 things left to draw. First, let's get the little semicircular opening in the gable end like that. Little arched opening. Whoop. And a line like that. Now let's deal with the stairs. We know that the retaining wall is 2 feet 6 inches high, and we know that the stairs go from the top of that to down 2 foot 6 inches. We can also count the risers and see that there are 4 equal risers. So we can divide that in half and then divide it in half again, and we will have laid out, just like masonry courses, the height of the treads of those stairs. We can also see that the space is divided into 4 equal treads. So we can just say, okay, that's half and that's half again, so that, and the first stair is on the ground, so the stairs are going to lay out like that. We just lay them out on the side wall just like a carpenter would if he were going to build them, or form them if they were concrete. We draw the top of the retaining wall and the bottom of the retaining wall. We can bring this line on out because it just keeps coming. We're on this upper level, and the steps descend down to a lower level, so all we need to do is pull those lines across the perspective like this, respecting that far vanishing point and getting just a little wider as they come down. And we should be seeing a little more of each tread as we come down because we're looking down on them a little more. And I think my whole set slopes not enough. They ought to be more like that. I'll correct that with a final overlay. Okay, let's get the patio wall in the back, and we're about finished. It extends, we can see 10 feet. So all we need to do is just extend what looks like a 10-foot square to us, except there's about a 10-foot square. Except the patio wall is really only 5 feet high. So there it is, 5 feet high, extending 10 feet. And we won't see it return because it will be returning back to a vanishing point which we've gone beyond. There are just a few things that we can do to this perspective that will make it look a great deal better. And although they're the subject of subsequent videotapes, let's take just a minute or so and add a little quality to this perspective that we spent so much time drawing. The first thing to do always is to spatially profile the drawing. So if you take your fatter black pen and just heavy up all the lines that hide space, both sides of both columns, the ridge line of the roof, the gable end wall, the top of the patio wall and the end of the patio wall, this line that comes forward that hides the lower space, and I forgot one part of the ridge there. Next thing we can do is assume the sun is coming from the left, but that it's cloudy day, or the sun is behind a cloud, so we don't have to deal with direct shadows, and we can just shade in all those parts of the building that would be turned away from the sun. Right-hand part of the columns, the face of this roof, and this little piece of wall down here. And then we can pick up our white Prismacolor pencil and add a little sunlight to those surfaces of the building that we know are turned toward the sun. And if you have time, you can take a little more time with this than I'm taking and make a better drawing out of it. It also will improve the looks of the building if we take a red colored pencil and just color the roof red. And in subsequent videotapes, we will learn how to cast the real shadows on the building, which always makes a building look a great deal better. And we'll learn how to draw backgrounds and foregrounds and trees, like I'm going to draw behind the building. Distant context, like mountains or surrounding buildings. And the foreground, which makes any building look like it's sitting on the Earth's surface. And we add a couple of figures there, and we have a fairly decent little perspective. And what I'd like you to appreciate more than anything else maybe is how quickly you can draw the three-dimensional quality of a building if you've taken the time to learn the procedures and the skills. And notice that we haven't picked up an architectural scale and we haven't relied on a straight edge.